I'm Jono Buchanan, and in this video we're going to make our first software instrument recording. I've set up Retro Synth on track 1, the only track within our project so far, and I've selected a preset called Analog Pluck, which sounds like this. And what I want to do is to make a recording for this particular track. Now when I press record, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hear the click track running, and this gives me a good indication of the sound or the speed of my current project. We're at 120 beats per minute by default, which sounds like this. If I decide that I want to record a little bit faster than that or a little bit slower, I can click where it says 120 and simply drag up or down. So let's go up to 124. This time when I press record, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play in the notes that I want to record. Now we can always move any recordings that we make later on, so it doesn't really matter where I start. But whenever I press record in Logic for the first time, I'm going to get a bar of count in. So I can start recording after just one bar, or I can wait a little longer if I want to. Let's make a recording. Okay, so there's 2 bars of this little sequence that I had in mind. And you can see that when I press stop, Logic creates this little area here, which we call a region. A region contains information, and we have regions for audio tracks, and we have regions for MIDI tracks, and this is a MIDI track. And the reason that I know that it's a MIDI track is because I've just played those notes into the program, but also if I double click on this region, we have a chance to see the first of Logic's editors. Now this can be accessed either by double clicking, as we just did, or by toggling this little scissors icon, which is the editor icon within Logic. And when I open this up, I have a chance to see the notes that I've played. Now what we can see is that these notes are in 2 different colours. We've got some green notes and some orange ones, and they relate to what we call velocity, how hard I press these notes. The brighter the colour, the louder the note, and the duller the colour, the quieter the note. So we can see that there are a range of different velocities that I've played here, and that's what the colours represent. We can also see where the notes fall, so you can see that the sequence currently starts in bar 2 and it finishes at the end of bar 3. And at the moment, this information is just exactly as I played it. Within Logic, we have a chance to change various things with regards to notes and how they're positioned. I mentioned velocity a little while ago, and we can change the strength of these notes if we want to make them all stronger or less strong if we want the sequence to be a bit quieter. But what we can also do is to start thinking about the timing of performances as well. And you can see, particularly if I zoom in on this window a little bit, that some of the notes aren't completely in time. This very first note that I've played here is actually a little bit early. It falls before the beginning of bar 2. Now here we're entering the realms now of what we call MIDI editing, the process of actually changing our performances. And one of the most powerful things about MIDI is that once we've made a recording like this, there are aspects of it that we can change to make things feel better musically. And one thing I'm going to do here is to use one of the most common MIDI editing techniques, which is called Quantize. This allows me to apply timing correction to this sequence that I've just recorded. So when I click on the sequence here, up here in the top left-hand corner, here is the Quantize option, and at the moment that is off. Now what Quantize lets me do is to move notes to a nearest note location. And here what I'm going to do is to select a 16th note. And that will move every note to the nearest 16th note. Now, as I release on that and select and confirm this choice, you can now see that the notes have been pulled in time, which means as we listen back, we'll see or hear perfect timing in this performance. And you can see that I'm accessing playback simply by using some key commands. This enter button on my keyboard allows me to play back, and 0 allows me to stop. But of course, I can use the transport controls here if I want to instead. So there we are, I've made my first recording within Logic. Now what I want to do is to add a second sound, maybe as a bass line, to sit underneath this sequence. So what I'm going to do is to set up a second instrument. I'm going to do that by double clicking here, and again I'm going to select Retro Synth as my chosen sound source. I'm going to go into the presets here to select a bass sound, and I'm going to choose, I think, classic analog bass. Now what this is going to allow me to do is to record a bass line underneath this little synth sequence that I've played a moment ago. So I'm going to again come back to the record button, and I'm going to play underneath this first sequence, and I'll hear that first one play back as I record the second. So I've now got two sequences playing back at once. Straight away, I'm going to quantize that as well. And what I'm also going to do is to use another MIDI controller to change another aspect of the performance that I've just put in. We can see straight away that the editor is open for this second sequence here, and I've got an even broader range now of velocities. These green notes are a little bit duller and therefore quieter. This last note's really loud. I can tell that because it's orange and therefore it's nice and bright. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Logic's editors to change another aspect, which is the strength of the velocities that I've played. Now up here in the top left-hand corner, underneath Quantize, there are a range of things that I can do to change the MIDI recording that I've just made. And if I toggle on this little button where it says more, this little triangle, I can expand this display even more to have access to a broader range of controllers. Now one thing that I can do here is to change what we call MIDI dynamics, the strength of the notes that we've played. What I want to do is to make them all exactly the same. And I can do that over here on the left-hand side in this dynamics window. Now what this allows me to do is to select either a sort of squeezing of the velocities that I've played or an absolutely fixed level whereby all of those velocities will be the same. And if I click on these little arrows here, fixed is right up at the top, which achieves exactly that result. Now velocity is recorded over 128 steps, from 1 at the quietest up to 128. So by selecting fixed, I'm actually picking a unit right in the middle at 64. So if I want the notes to all be louder than 64 but to be all the same, I can select fixed here, and then in the velocity drop down here I can select what's called an offset, a value that's either higher or lower to bring all the velocities up or down. So I'm going to double click and select 20, and that effectively adds 20 units of velocity. So using a little bit of maths, we're now at 84. All of these notes will have a velocity of 84. Now, if I want to see those registered here within this editor, what I can do is to press Control and N, and that will normalize those settings that I've just applied. You can now see that the velocities are all the same color because they're all fixed at the same velocity. So if we play this back, we should hear a real evenness now in that bass line. Okay, we've actually covered a lot of things in that video. We now have made our first recording, we've selected a tempo for it. We've learned about Quantize, how to pull timings into position for notes that are off-grid. We've also set up a second instrument, selected a sound for it, and also corrected its timing. And on that bass line, what we've also done is to look at velocity control. We've used fixed velocity to squeeze the velocities down to one level, and then we've used a velocity offset to make all of those notes stronger. If we wanted to, of course, we could now add a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth instrument and keep building our arrangement.